The drawing room of Ashford Manor had not changed in 20 years. Alexander Kane, 10th Duke of Greymore, stood before the tall windows overlooking the east garden, a glass of claret warming slowly in his hand. The late afternoon sun slanted through the leaded glass, casting fractured patterns of gold across Persian rugs, worn soft by generations of footsteps. The air smelled of beeswax, old leather and roses, white roses, arranged in crystal vases throughout the room with the kind of careless elegance that only old money could afford. Behind him, Lord Ashford laughed. It was a sound Alexander had known since childhood, booming, hearty, utterly devoid of subtlety, the kind of laugh that filled rooms and demanded attention, that made servants smile and dogs wag their tails. A laugh that had once made Alexander feel safe. Now it made his jaw tighten. "She accepted, Greymore," Lord Ashford said, his voice thick with satisfaction and perhaps too much brandy. "My Caroline. She's finally accepted Viscount Hartley's proposal. Can you believe it? After all this time, all those suitors she turned away, she said yes." Alexander did not turn from the window. Outside, the garden stretched toward the tree line. Manicured hedges, gravel paths, stone benches positioned at precise intervals. And there, beneath the ancient oak that marked the boundary between cultivated grounds and wild forest, stood a woman in a pale blue dress. Caroline. Even from this distance, even with her back turned, he would have known her anywhere. The particular straightness of her spine, the way she held her shoulders, not rigid, but contained, as if she carried something precious and breakable inside her chest, the way the wind caught the hem of her dress, lifting it slightly before letting it fall. She did not move. She did not turn toward the house. She simply stood there, looking at something he could not see. "Greymore, did you hear me?" Alexander lifted the glass to his lips and took a slow sip. The wine was excellent. A Bordeaux, probably from Ashford's private cellar, the kind of vintage one served to announce good fortune. It tasted like ash. "I heard you," he said. His voice was even, controlled, each word measured with the precision of a man who had spent 34 years learning to reveal nothing. "My congratulations." Lord Ashford crossed the room in 3 long strides, clapping Alexander on the shoulder with the easy familiarity of lifelong friendship. His hand was heavy, warm, slightly damp. Alexander fought the urge to pull away. "She'll be devastated you cannot attend the engagement ball, you know," Ashford continued, his breath smelling of tobacco and brandy. "You've always been her favorite, ever since she was a girl. Do you remember? She used to follow you around like a puppy, demanding you read to her, teach her chess, explain Latin declensions." He laughed again. "Hartley doesn't stand a chance of being half as beloved as you are in her estimation." "Then, why is she marrying him?" The question burned in Alexander's throat, acid and urgent. He swallowed it. "I'm certain the Viscount will make her very happy," he said instead. "Oh, undoubtedly, undoubtedly. Good family, Hartley. Solid lineage. 8,000 a year, and that estate in Derbyshire. Lovely property, I'm told, though I haven't seen it myself. He's young, healthy, not given to excess." Ashford trailed off, his gaze drifting to the window, to his daughter standing alone beneath the oak tree. For just a moment, something flickered across his face. Doubt, perhaps, or recognition of something unspoken. Then it was gone. "She could have done worse," Ashford concluded, his tone brightening artificially. "Much worse. I'm pleased. Her mother would have been pleased." He paused, cleared his throat. "You're certain you cannot attend the ball? It's 3 weeks hence. Surely you could postpone your business in London." "I'm afraid not." A lie. Alexander had no business in London. He had nothing waiting for him but empty rooms in a townhouse too large for one man, and a schedule deliberately filled with meaningless obligations designed to keep him moving, working, too occupied to think, too occupied to feel. But he could not, would not, stand in a ballroom and watch Caroline Ashford become engaged to another man, could not smile and offer congratulations while something inside him shattered so quietly no one would hear it break. He had done many difficult things in his life. That was beyond him. "Pity," Ashford said, though his tone suggested it was anything but. "Well, I'm certain she'll understand. A duke's responsibilities and all that. Caroline has always been sensible about such things." "Has she?" Alexander's fingers tightened around the stem of his glass. Sensible. Yes, Caroline had always been sensible. Intelligent, composed, dutiful. She had managed her father's household after her mother's death with quiet efficiency. She had navigated society's expectations with grace. She had never caused scandal, never been anything but exactly what a gentleman's daughter should be. But there had been a time, years ago, when the world was younger and less complicated, when she had been more than sensible. She had been alive. He remembered her at 16, climbing trees in muslin dresses that her governess despaired over, grass stains on her knees and leaves in her hair, demanding he explain philosophy, poetry, the rotation of stars. Laughing. God, she had laughed then, freely and often, a sound like bells or water over stones. When had she stopped laughing like that? He knew the answer. He knew exactly when. More wine, Your Grace? A footman had appeared at his elbow, silent as smoke, holding a crystal decanter. No, thank you. The footman bowed and retreated. Ashford was still talking about the wedding, the settlement, the guest list, details that blurred together into a dull roar of sound that Alexander only half heard. He nodded at appropriate intervals, made appropriate sounds of acknowledgement, and kept his eyes on the woman in the garden. She had not moved. What are you thinking, Caroline? Are you happy, relieved, resigned? Do you think of me at all? The thought was selfish, he knew, pathetic even, but it persisted, a stubborn ache beneath his ribs that no amount of discipline could silence. Ashford's voice cut through his thoughts. You'll stay for dinner, of course. Cook's prepared lamb, your favorite, if I recall correctly. It was not his favorite. It had been his father's favorite, but Alexander had learned long ago that correcting people's assumptions was more trouble than it was worth. I appreciate the invitation, he said carefully, but I'm afraid I must return to Greymore before dark. Estate matters. Another lie. But Ashford accepted it with a genial nod, already turning toward the door, already moving on to the next thing, the next conversation, the next small triumph to celebrate. As you wish. As you wish. But you'll at least say goodbye to Caroline before you leave. She'd never forgive me if I let you slip away without a word. Alexander's chest constricted. Of course. Excellent. I believe she's in the garden. I'll send word you'll be down shortly. And then Ashford was gone, his footsteps retreating down the hallway, his voice calling for a servant, leaving Alexander alone in the drawing room with the slanted sunlight and the scent of roses and the weight of everything he could not say. He set down his glass. He straightened his cuffs, checked his reflection in the mirror above the mantelpiece, hair combed, cravat straight, expression blank, and walked toward the door, toward the garden, toward her. The gravel path crunched softly beneath his boots. The evening was cooling, the sky beginning to shift from gold to amber to the first pale hints of purple. Somewhere in the trees, a thrush was singing, a clear, liquid melody that seemed almost mocking in its beauty. Caroline had not moved from beneath the oak tree. As Alexander approached, he could see more clearly now the way her hands were clasped loosely before her, the slight tilt of her head as if she were listening to something far away. She wore no bonnet, and the low sun caught in her hair, turning it bronze and copper and gold. She did not turn when his footsteps slowed behind her. Father sent you to say goodbye, she said. Not a question. Her voice was low, steady, utterly calm. The voice of a woman who had learned to school her emotions as carefully as he had. He did, Alexander confirmed. You could have refused. I could have. Silence. The thrush sang. The wind moved through the oak leaves with a sound like distant water. Finally she turned, and for just a moment, one unguarded, terrible moment, he saw it. The grief. It was there in her eyes, green-grey and storm-dark, the same eyes that had looked at him across dinner tables and ballrooms and garden paths for 20 years. But now they held something, raw and wounded, something she could not quite hide despite all her careful composure. Then she smiled, a small, polite, perfectly practiced smile. Congratulations are in order, I suppose, she said. Your father told me. Viscount Hartley is a fortunate man. Is he? The question hung between them, soft and dangerous. Alexander's hands clenched briefly at his sides before he forced them to relax. He is, he said firmly. You'll be happy, Caroline. Will I? Yes. You sound very certain. I am. Another lie. But this one was necessary. This one was a kindness. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, and he wondered, not for the first time, how much she knew, how much she had guessed, whether she understood the promise that had shaped the last 10 years of both their lives, whether she hated him for it. I'm glad you came today, she said finally, even if you cannot stay for dinner, even if you cannot attend the ball. I'm glad you were here when Father told. You? Where else would I be? Anywhere but here, nowhere but here. She turned back toward the forest, toward the deepening shadows between the trees. Do you remember, she said softly, when we were children, you used to read to me, right here, beneath this tree? I remember. Byron, Wordsworth, Keats. You had a beautiful reading voice. I always thought you should have been an actor instead of a duke. Despite himself, despite everything, Alexander felt his mouth twitch. My mother would have been horrified. Your mother would have come around eventually. You always could persuade her to anything. Not anything. Caroline glanced at him, something flickering in her expression. No, she agreed quietly. Not anything. The weight of unspoken things pressed down on them. Questions unasked, truths untold, a decade of careful distance that had carved itself into the space where friendship used to live. Alexander wanted to speak, wanted to tell her. What? That he had kept his promise. To her father because he had no choice. That he had watched her grow from a girl into a woman and fallen in love so slowly he had not realized it was happening until it was too late. That every dinner they had shared, every polite conversation, every careful smile had cost him something he could not name. That he was glad she was marrying Hartley, because at least then she would be safe, cared for, free of the ruin that seemed to follow the Kane family like a curse. That he was devastated. But he said none of it, because 10 years ago he had given his word, and Alexander Kane did not break his word, even when it destroyed him. I should go, he said instead. It's getting late. Caroline nodded, not looking at him. Of course. Safe travels, Your Grace. Your Grace. Not Alexander. Not the name she had called him when they were young. Just his title. A wall between them. He bowed, a formal, proper bow, and turned to leave. He had taken 3 steps when her voice stopped him. Alexander? He froze. Slowly he looked back. She was still facing the forest, her profile etched against the darkening sky. Thank you, she said, so quietly he almost did not hear, for keeping your promise. The words struck him like a blade between the ribs. She knows. She had always known. He opened his mouth to say what he did not know, to apologize perhaps, to explain, to beg forgiveness for a sin she had never named. But before he could speak, she added, "It must have been very difficult." And then she walked away deeper into the garden, disappearing into the shadows beneath the trees, leaving him standing alone on the gravel path with the dying light and the singing thrush and the unbearable weight of everything he would never say. This story is a work of fiction created for emotional reflection and storytelling. Any resemblance to real persons or events is purely coincidental. Alexander returned to Greymore as the last light faded from the sky. The house loomed. Before him, grey stone, tall windows, centuries of history pressing down like a burden he had inherited along with the title. Lights glowed in a few rooms, warm and golden, but they did nothing to dispel the essential coldness of the place. Home, if one could call it that. His valet took his coat and hat without comment. His butler informed him that dinner would be served at 8, that correspondence had arrived from London, that the steward wished to speak with him at his earliest convenience. Alexander nodded, dismissed them all, and climbed the stairs to his study. It was a large room lined with books he rarely read, dominated by a desk that had belonged to his father and his father's father before him. A portrait hung above the fireplace. The late Duke of Greymore painted in the prime of his life, handsome and commanding in full formal dress. Alexander looked at it and felt nothing but a dull, familiar resentment. He poured himself a brandy, sat in the chair by the window and watched the darkness settle over his lands. And he thought, as he had thought every day for 10 years, about the promise that had cost him everything. The promise he would keep, until he died, even if it killed him slowly, quietly, one day at a time, even if no one would ever know. Have you ever wondered what it costs to be honorable? Not the small honorable things, holding doors, telling polite lies, maintaining appearances, but the deep, bone-breaking kind of honor, the kind that asks you to sacrifice everything you want for something you believe is right, even when no one will ever thank you, even when you're not certain you've made the right choice. Alexander Cain lived that question every day, and it was destroying him. But he was far too disciplined to let it show. The summer his father died, England had burned. Not literally, though in Alexander's memory, it felt that way. The heat had been oppressive, relentless, the kind that turned London into a furnace and sent those who could afford it fleeing to their country estates. The Thames had run low and foul, horses collapsed in the streets, the poor died in their cramped tenements while the rich complained about wilted flowers and warm champagne. Alexander had been 23. He remembered standing in the study at Graymore, his father's study, though it would soon become his, staring at ledgers that made no sense, numbers that didn't add up, debts listed in careful script, each one a small damnation. His father had been a gambler, not the romantic kind one reads about in novels, no dashing wagers on horse races or card games played with aristocratic flair. No, the late Duke of Graymore had gambled in the most mundane and devastating way possible. Bad investments, foolish speculations, loans taken from friends and never repaid. He had mortgaged the future to maintain the present. And then he had died. Suddenly, without warning, slumped over this very desk with a pen still in his hand, leaving Alexander to inherit not just a title but a catastrophe. The funeral had been held on the hottest day of the year. Alexander remembered the weight of his mourning clothes, black wool suffocating in the heat, the smell of the church, incense and lilies and too many bodies pressed too close together, the meaningless condolences offered by people who had not liked his father but felt obligated to attend. His mother had stood beside him, veiled and silent, her hand cold in his despite the temperature. She had not cried. The Dowager Duchess of Graymore did not cry in public. She would save that for later, alone in her rooms where no one could witness her grief. Caroline had been there, 16 years old, dressed in pale grey, not full mourning, not for the father of a friend, but a gesture of respect nonetheless. She had stood with her own father, her face solemn, her eyes finding Alexander's across the crowded church. He had not been able to look at her for long. The pity in her gaze had been unbearable. After the service, after the interment, after the endless receiving line of false sympathy, Alexander had retreated to the study. He had loosened his cravat, poured himself his first brandy as the new Duke of Graymore, and tried to understand the ruins his father had left behind. That was when Lord Ashford had found him. "May I come in?" Alexander had looked up from the ledgers, his vision slightly blurred from staring at numbers too long in dim light. Ashford stood in the doorway, still in his funeral attire, his expression grave. "Of course." Ashford had entered, closing the door softly behind him. He had not sat. Instead, he had stood before the desk, his hands clasped behind his back, looking every inch the successful gentleman he was, wealthy, respected, untouched by the kind of desperation that permeated this room like smoke. "I won't insult you by asking how you're managing," Ashford had said quietly. "I can see well enough." Alexander had said nothing. "Your father and I were friends for 30 years, Ashford continued. "We went to Eton together, Cambridge. We hunted, we drank, we celebrated each other's marriages and mourned each other's losses." He paused, his gaze drifting to the portrait above the fireplace. "I loved him like a brother." "But," Alexander had said, because there was always a but in speeches like this, "but he was not a careful man, not with money, not with trust." Ashford's eyes had returned to Alexander, sharp and assessing. "He borrowed from me many times, substantial amounts." Alexander's stomach had turned to lead. "How much?" £15,000. The number had hung in the air between them, obscene in its magnitude. £15,000. More than many estates generated in a year. More than Alexander could possibly repay in a decade, not with Graymore's lands already mortgaged, the tenants struggling, The investments worthless. I see, Alexander had managed, his voice steady despite the panic rising in his chest. I'm not here to collect, Ashford had said quickly. Not in the way you think. I know you haven't got it. I know the estate is... He had gestured vaguely at the ledgers. I know. Then why are you here? Ashford had been quiet for a long moment, seeming to choose his words with care. I want to make you an offer, he had said finally, a way to settle the debt without money changing hands. Every instinct Alexander possessed had screamed warning. Nothing in life came without cost, especially not mercy. What kind of offer? He had asked carefully. Ashford had walked to the window, looking out over the Greymore grounds, overgrown gardens, crumbling statuary, the visible signs of neglect that money and staff shortages had created. My daughter, he had said, not turning around, is 16 years old. She's intelligent, beautiful, well-mannered. She'll make an excellent match someday. Alexander had felt the conversation shifting, sliding towards something he could not yet see, but instinctively feared. She will, he had agreed cautiously. She's also been half in love with you since she was 10 years old. The words had struck like a physical blow. Alexander had opened his mouth to deny it, to protest, to say something, but Ashford had held up a hand. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise. I have eyes. I've watched her watch you at every dinner, every gathering, every damned garden party for the last 6 years. The way she lights up when you speak to her. The way she finds excuses to be near you. The way she... He had stopped, his jaw tight. She's a child, Greymore. She doesn't understand the difference between admiration and love, between a childhood friendship and something more. I have never... Alexander had begun, his voice sharp with offense. I know, Ashford had interrupted. You've been nothing but appropriate. You're a gentleman. You've treated her with perfect propriety. He had turned from the window, his expression hard. But that will change. What? You're a duke now. You have power, influence, a name that still means something despite your father's failures. And my daughter, his voice had softened almost imperceptibly. My daughter is vulnerable in ways she doesn't yet understand. She trusts you. She admires you. If you chose to pursue her, she wouldn't refuse you. I would never. People change, Ashford had said flatly. Circumstances change. You might decide someday that marrying Caroline would be advantageous. She has a considerable dowry. She's well connected. She would bring stability to your household, money to your estate, and she would say yes in a heartbeat. Alexander had felt something cold and terrible settling over him, the understanding of where this conversation was heading. What do you want from me? He had asked quietly. Ashford had returned to the desk, placing both hands on its surface, leaning forward until he was close enough that Alexander could see the veins in his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands. I want you to promise me, give me your word as a gentleman on your father's grave, that you will never pursue my daughter, that you will never court her, never propose to her, never allow her to believe there could be anything between you beyond friendship. The study had been silent except for the ticking of the clock on the mantel. Alexander's mind had raced, searching for alternatives, for escape routes, for any way out of this trap. But there was none. £15,000. His father's debts, his family's name, his honor. And if I give you this promise, he had said slowly, the debt is forgiven. Entirely. You won't tell anyone about my father's borrowing? About the state of the estate? Not a soul. As far as society is concerned, your father died solvent and respected. Your name remains untarnished. And Caroline, what will you tell her? Ashford had straightened, something like pain crossing his face. Nothing. She doesn't need to know about any of this. She'll grow up, meet other suitable young men, fall in love properly. She'll forget this childish infatuation. She won't, Alexander had thought. Neither of us will. But he had not said it. Instead, he had stood, walked to the window where Ashford had stood moments before, and looked out at the estate he had inherited, along with all its burdens. He had thought about his mother, widowed and dependent on him now. He had thought about the tenants, the servants, the people whose livelihoods depended. On Greymore remaining solvent, he had thought about his family's name, already tarnished by his father's failures, and how much worse it would be if the full extent of the debts became known. And he had thought about Caroline, 16, bright-eyed, full of promise, and how she deserved better than to be shackled to a family drowning in debt and disgrace. She deserved a real choice, not one made out of childish infatuation or misguided loyalty. She deserved to marry someone who could give her the life she ought to have, someone who wasn't him. "Very well," Alexander had said, his voice hollow. "You have my word. I will never pursue your daughter. I will never court her, never propose to her, never—" The words had stuck in his throat. "Never allow her to believe there could be anything between us." Ashford had exhaled, relief visible in the loosening of his shoulders. "Thank you," he had said quietly. "I know this isn't easy, but it's for the best, for both of you." "Is it?" Alexander had not been certain then. He was not certain now, 10 years later, sitting in this same study, staring at this same portrait of his father. But he had given his word, and a gentleman's word was binding, even when it destroyed him. The transition had not been immediate. For the first year after the funeral, things had continued almost normally. Caroline had still been young enough that propriety demanded limited social interaction. Alexander had been consumed with salvaging what he could of the estate, selling off assets, negotiating with creditors, slowly pulling Greymore back from the brink of ruin. Their paths had crossed only occasionally, at church, at seasonal gatherings, at the rare dinner party. She had smiled at him. He had smiled back. Nothing had seemed different, but it was. Alexander had begun to withdraw, subtly at first, so subtly perhaps even he had not fully noticed. He had stopped accepting every invitation to Ashford Manor, had stopped seeking out Caroline's company at social events, had stopped the easy familiarity that had characterized their childhood friendship. He had become formal, distant, proper. Caroline had noticed. Of course she had noticed. He remembered the first time she had asked him about it. She would have been 17, nearly 18. They had been at a garden party, one of those interminable summer affairs with croquet and strawberries and far too many people. She had found him standing alone near the refreshment table, and she had looked at him with those storm-grey eyes and said very quietly, "Have I offended you somehow?" The question had caught him completely unprepared. "What? No, of course not." "Then why do you avoid me?" "I don't—" "You do," she had interrupted, her voice still soft but firm. "You used to talk to me, really talk to me, about books and ideas and things that mattered. Now you speak to me the way you'd speak to any acquaintance. Polite, distant, as if we're strangers." Alexander had felt panic rising in his chest. "We're not children anymore, Caroline. It's not appropriate for—" "Appropriate?" She had laughed, a sharp, bitter sound utterly unlike her usual laughter. "Since when have you cared about appropriate? You're the one who taught me Latin curse words when I was 12, who let me climb trees in my good dress, who told me I should read philosophy even though my governess said it wasn't suitable for young ladies. That was different. Why? Because I made a promise. Because your father threatened everything I have left. Because I cannot be what you need me to be." But he had said none of it. "We're growing up," he had said instead, hating himself for the weakness of it. "Things change." She had looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she had nodded slowly, something dying in her eyes. "I see," she had said. "Yes, things change." And she had walked away. That had been the moment, Alexander thought now. The moment when the distance between them had become permanent. When childhood friendship had calcified into something else, something colder, more careful, defined by everything they could not say. Over the years that followed, Caroline had done exactly what her father had predicted. She had grown up, she had had her debut season, had been courted by suitable young men, had danced at balls and attended the theatre and done all the things expected of a gentleman's daughter. And Alexander had watched from a distance, maintaining his promise, keeping his word, even when it killed him. Especially then. There had been moments of weakness, times when his resolve had faltered, when he had almost spoken. The worst had been 3 years ago, at a ball in London. Caroline had been 23, in the full bloom of womanhood, graceful, composed, heartbreakingly beautiful in ivory silk that made her skin glow like pearl. She had been surrounded by admirers, as always, but he had seen the weariness in her eyes, the way her smile never quite reached them anymore. They had danced, one dance a waltz because refusing would have been noticed, would have been rude. and for 3 minutes and 47 seconds, he had counted, God help him, he had counted every second, he had held her in his arms, properly, of course, appropriately, exactly the correct distance apart. But he had felt the warmth of her hand in his, the whisper of her breath, the subtle scent of lavender that always seemed to cling to her hair. And she had looked up at him. Just once, just for a moment, and he had seen it. The question, why? Why did you leave me? Why did everything change? What did I do wrong? He had wanted to tell her, wanted to explain everything, the promise, the debt, the impossible choice he had made. Wanted to say that she had done nothing wrong, that she was perfect, that the fault was entirely his. But the music had ended. He had bowed. She had curtsied. And they had parted, returning to their separate spheres as if nothing had happened, as if his heart hadn't been breaking in his chest. Now, sitting in his study 10 years after making that damned promise, Alexander wondered if he had been right. Ashford had argued it was for Caroline's good, that she deserved a real choice, that marrying Alexander would have been a mistake, tying herself to a family with debts and disgrace, to a man who could offer her nothing but a tarnished name. And perhaps he had been right. Perhaps Caroline was better off with Hartley, safer, more secure, free to build a life unmarred by the Kane family's failures. But sometimes late at night, when the house was silent and the darkness pressed close, Alexander wondered what would have happened if he had refused Ashford's offer, if he had faced the scandal, let the world know about his father's debts, accepted the social ruin, wondered if Caroline would have chosen him anyway, if they could have built something together, not perfect, not easy, but real, wondered if honor was always the right choice, or if sometimes it was just another word for cowardice. He would never know. The choice had been made, the promise had been given, and Alexander Kane kept his promises, even when they destroyed him. This story is a work of fiction, created for emotional reflection and storytelling. Any resemblance to real persons or events is purely coincidental. What does it mean to protect someone? Is it shielding them from harm? Or is it making choices for them, deciding what they can handle, what they deserve, what's best for them, without ever asking what they want? Lord Ashford believed he was protecting his daughter. Alexander believed he was honoring his word, but neither of them asked Caroline what she needed. And that, perhaps, was the greatest failure of all. 3 weeks before the engagement announcement, before the world shifted into this new, unbearable configuration, there had been a dinner. Alexander had tried to refuse the invitation. He had stood in his study with the cream-colored card in his hand. Lord Ashford requests the pleasure of your company, and seriously considered writing back with some excuse. A prior engagement, estate business, illness. Any lie would have sufficed. But his mother had been visiting from the dower house, and she had seen the invitation, and she had given him that look, the one that said she knew exactly what he was thinking and would not allow it. You cannot hide forever, Alexander, she had said quietly. I'm not hiding. Then, what do you call it? He had not answered, because she was right and they both knew it, so he had gone. The evening had been unseasonably warm for early autumn, the air thick with the smell of the last roses and something else, something heavier, like the earth itself was preparing to sleep. Alexander had arrived exactly on time, neither early nor late, the way he did everything these days, with perfect, meaningless precision. Ashford Manor had glowed with candlelight, every window bright, music drifting from the open doors. It was not a large dinner party, perhaps 20 guests, but it was elegant, refined, the kind of gathering designed to showcase success and good taste. Caroline had been standing in the entrance hall when he arrived. For a moment, one breath, one heartbeat, they had simply looked at each other. She had worn green that night. Not the pale, fashionable shades that were popular that season, but a deep, rich emerald that made her eyes look like a forest after rain. The dress was cut in the latest style, off the shoulder, with delicate beading that caught the light when she moved. Her hair was swept up, held in place with pearl combs that had belonged to her mother. She looked like something from a painting, something unattainable, something he had no right to want. Your Grace, she had said, curtsying with perfect formality. Lady Caroline. He had bowed. They had exchanged the required pleasantries, the weather, his journey, mutual acquaintances, invoices, that were pleasant and empty and utterly devoid of meaning. And then her father had appeared, jovial and welcoming, steering Alexander toward the drawing room where the other guests were assembled. Alexander had not looked back. He could not afford to. Dinner had been a calculated torture. Someone, Ashford certainly, or perhaps Caroline herself, had arranged the seating so that Alexander sat directly across from her, not beside her, which would have allowed him to avoid her gaze, to focus on the guest to his left or right and maintain polite distance. No, across from her, so that every time he looked up, every time he reached for his wine or cut his meat or pretended to listen to the conversation around him, he saw her, the candlelight, the green dress, the way she smiled at the gentleman beside her, some young lord whose name Alexander had not caught and did not care to learn, the way she laughed. God, the way she laughed. It was not her real laugh, not the one he remembered from childhood, bright and unreserved. This was her society laugh, polite, musical, perfectly pitched to charm without revealing anything true. Alexander hated it, hated that she had learned to perform her emotions, to present a version of herself that was acceptable while hiding everything that mattered. Hated that he understood exactly why she did it, because he did the same thing. Every day, every moment. The first course was served, a delicate soup, something with herbs and cream. And the conversation turned to politics, the recent reforms, the debates in Parliament, the usual subjects that filled society dinners because they were safe, impersonal, requiring nothing more than educated opinions and rehearsed positions. Alexander contributed when addressed, making the comments expected of a duke, measured, reasonable, carefully neutral on anything controversial. But his attention was elsewhere. Caroline had barely touched her soup. She sat with perfect posture, her hands folded in. Her lap when not required to hold her spoon, her expression pleasantly attentive. But she was not eating, not really. She lifted the spoon occasionally, brought it to her lips, set it down again. A performance of dining rather than the act itself. Was she unwell, upset, or simply tired of pretending? The second course arrived, fish, prepared with lemon and butter, garnished with herbs from Ashford's own gardens. Alexander forced himself to eat, to taste nothing, to nod when his dining companions made observations about the meal. Across from him, Caroline stared at her plate. The conversation shifted. A lady to Alexander's left, Mrs. Pemberton, wife of a local magistrate, began discussing the upcoming season, speculating about which young ladies would be presented, which matches might be made. And of course, Mrs. Pemberton said, her voice carrying that peculiar tone of feigned discretion that actually ensured everyone listened, "We're all waiting to see if dear Caroline will finally accept one of her many suitors." Alexander's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Caroline's smile did not waver. "I'm certain I don't know what you mean, Mrs. Pemberton," she said lightly. "Oh, come now, my dear. You've turned down, what was it, Robert? At least 4 proposals in the last 2 years. Mrs. Pemberton laughed, a high, brittle sound. "We're beginning to think you're impossible to please." Several guests chuckled. Caroline's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on her wine glass. "Perhaps," she said, her voice still light, still perfect, "I simply have standards." More laughter. But there was an edge to it now, a discomfort that rippled around the table. Lord Ashford cleared his throat. "My daughter knows her own mind. I've raised her to be discerning, not desperate." Of course, Mrs. Pemberton said quickly, sensing she had overstepped. "I meant no offense. It's admirable, really. So many young women rush into unsuitable matches these days." The conversation moved on. But Alexander saw the way Caroline's jaw tightened, the way her breathing had changed, just slightly faster, shallower, the way she reached for her wine and took a longer drink than was strictly necessary. Their eyes met across the table, and for one unguarded moment he saw the truth. She was drowning. Not dramatically, not obviously, but slowly, quietly, the way people drown when they're too exhausted to call for help, sinking beneath the weight of expectations and social performances, and the endless pressure to be what everyone else needed her to be. He knew the feeling intimately. It was the same way he had been drowning for 10 years. The main course was served, roasted lamb, his alleged favorite, with potatoes and seasonal vegetables, and Ashford steered the conversation towards safer topics: the harvest, the state of the roads, plans for the upcoming hunting season. Alexander participated when required. He praised the meal. He discussed the quality of this year's crops. He agreed that the roads truly were in terrible condition and something ought to be done. And the entire time he watched Caroline. She had recovered her composure, was smiling again, engaging with her dining companions with practiced ease, but he could see the exhaustion beneath it, the effort it cost her to maintain the facade. Halfway through the course, Ashford addressed him directly. "Greymore, I don't believe you've met Viscount Hartley. He's recently returned from touring the continent." "Hartley, may I introduce the Duke of Greymore?" A young man several seats down, sandy-haired, well-dressed, unremarkably handsome, nodded in Alexander's direction. "Your Grace, a pleasure. Lord Hartley. Hartley's family has an estate in Derbyshire," Ashford continued, and there was something in his tone, a particular emphasis, a deliberate casualness that immediately set Alexander on edge. 8,000 a year, beautiful property. He's been telling me about his plans for modernizing the tenant farms. Fascinating stuff. Alexander's fingers tightened on his knife. He understood immediately what this was. Ashford was introducing Hartley, showcasing him, preparing the ground. "How interesting," Alexander managed, his voice perfectly even. "Agricultural improvements are always worthwhile." "I quite agree," Hartley said eagerly. He had the enthusiasm of youth, of someone who had not yet learned that most plans failed, that good intentions meant nothing without resources and luck. "I've been reading extensively about crop rotation, drainage systems, new breeding techniques for livestock." He continued talking. Alexander stopped listening. His gaze drifted back to Caroline. She was staring at her plate again, her expression carefully blank. Did she know? Had Ashford already spoken to her about Hartley? Or was this the beginning, the first move in a campaign that would end with her engaged to this earnest, unremarkable man with his 8,000 a year and his enthusiasm for crop rotation? As if feeling his gaze, Caroline looked up. Their eyes met, and Alexander saw the question there, the same one that had haunted every interaction for 10 years. "Why? Why won't you fight for me? Why do you just sit there, silent, while my father parades potential husbands in front of me like livestock at market? Why don't you say something?" He wanted to. God, he wanted to. Wanted to stand up, walk around the table, take her hand, and tell everyone in this room to go to hell. Tell Ashford his promise meant nothing. Tell Caroline the truth, all of it, the debt, the threat, the impossible choice. Tell Hartley to find someone else. But he did not, because he had given his word, and breaking it would ruin everything, not just for himself, but for his mother, for the estate, for the careful reconstruction he had spent 10 years building. One broken promise would topple it all. So he looked away, returned his attention to his plate, and said nothing. Dessert was an elaborate affair. Several courses of sweets, fruits, delicate pastries that Alexander could not taste. He ate mechanically, made appropriate noises of appreciation, and counted the minutes until this ordeal would be over. When the ladies finally withdrew, leaving the men to their port and cigars, Alexander felt something close to relief. At least now he would not have to see her. At least now he could breathe. The men settled in their chairs, glasses were filled, and the conversation turned, as it always did, to business, politics, horses, and other safe masculine topics. Hartley sat beside Alexander. It was not accidental. "Your Grace," the young Viscount began, his tone respectful but eager, "I wonder if I might ask your advice on something?" "Of course. It's about Lady Caroline." Alexander's hand tightened on his glass. "Yes, I have. That is, I hold her in the highest regard." Hartley's ears had turned slightly pink. "Lord Ashford has indicated he would not be opposed to my paying her." "Attentions. But I wanted to, well, you've known her since childhood, haven't you? I thought you might offer some insight into how I might—" He trailed off, clearly embarrassed. Alexander stared at him. This boy, and he was a boy, despite being perhaps 25, wanted courting advice. Wanted Alexander to tell him how to win Caroline's heart. The absurdity of it was almost enough to make him laugh. Almost. "Lady Caroline," Alexander said slowly, choosing each word with care, is intelligent, principled and deserving of the utmost respect. If you approach her with sincerity and genuine regard, I'm certain she will give your suit fair consideration." It was the most dishonest thing he had ever said. Hartley beamed. "Thank you, Your Grace. That's very helpful. I confess I'm quite nervous about the whole business. She's so accomplished, so far above the usual run of young ladies. I want to do right by her. I'm certain you do. Lord Ashford seems to think we'd suit well, and I find her quite remarkable. You don't know her at all, but Alexander did not say it. Instead, he drained his port, excused himself with a manufactured headache, and left before he did something unforgivable. Like, tell the truth, he found Caroline in the garden. He had not meant to. He had fully intended to collect his coat, make his farewells to Ashford, and leave without seeing her again. But as he walked toward the front entrance, he had glanced out the window and seen her, a flash of green among the shadows, standing beneath the oak tree where they had played as children. His feet had carried him outside before his mind could object. The night was cooler now, the warmth of the day finally fading. Above, stars scattered across a moonless sky, and the darkness beneath the trees was nearly complete. Caroline did not turn when he approached. "You should go back inside," she said quietly. "Someone will notice you're missing." "I'm leaving." "Of course you are." There was no accusation in her tone, just weariness. Alexander stopped a few feet away, maintaining the distance that had become habitual. "Caroline, don't." She held up a hand, still not looking at him. "Please don't say whatever polite, meaningless thing you're about to say. I don't have the strength for it tonight." He fell silent. A long moment passed. Then, "Did you know about Hartley? Your father mentioned him. And he seems a decent man." She laughed, that same bitter sound from years. "Hago, a decent man, yes, he's very decent, very suitable, very everything a woman could want in a husband." "Then why?" "Because I don't love him." The words came out sharp, final. "Because I don't want decent and suitable. Because I'm tired of pretending that any of this is what I chose." Alexander's chest constricted. "Caroline, do you know what the worst part is?" She finally turned to face him, and even in the darkness he could see the tears on her cheeks. "It's not that you don't care. I think you do care in whatever limited way you're capable of. The worst part is that you won't fight. You just accept everything. My father's plans, society's expectations, all of it. You just surrender. It's not that simple, isn't it? There are things you don't understand. Circumstances. Then explain them to me." Her voice rose, trembling with emotion. "Tell me what happened. Tell me why everything changed. Tell me something real instead of these endless polite evasions." He could have. Right then, right there, he could have told her everything. About the debt, about the promise, about the choice he had made, and the decade he had spent living with its consequences. But what good would it do? It would not change anything, would not free him from his word, would only burden her with knowledge that served no purpose except to explain his cowardice. "I can't," he said quietly. Something broke in her expression. "Then we have nothing more to say to each other." She walked past him, back toward the house, her green dress disappearing into the shadows. Alexander stood alone beneath the oak tree, surrounded by darkness and the weight of everything he could not say. And he wondered, not for the first time, if honor was worth this price, if keeping his word mattered when it meant losing everything else. Have you ever kept silent to protect someone? Have you ever chosen duty over desire, honor over happiness? Have you ever wondered if you made the right choice? Alexander wondered every day, and the answer was always the same. He didn't know. He would never know. Because once a choice is made, once a path is taken, the other possibilities fade into nothing more than ghosts. And ghosts cannot answer questions. The engagement ball was held exactly 3 weeks after that dinner. Alexander had not planned to attend. In fact, he had been quite firm in his resolution not to attend. He had written his regrets to Lord Ashford, a brief, formal note citing pressing business in London that could not be postponed. It was not entirely a lie, there was business. Parliament was in session, and various committees required his attention. He could have postponed it, of course. A duke could postpone almost anything, but he had chosen not to. The invitation had arrived regardless, delivered by special messenger, as if the extra expense and urgency would somehow change his mind. He had left it unopened on his desk for 2 days, looking at it occasionally with the kind of dread one might feel toward a summons to execution. When he finally opened it, the card inside was cream-colored, embossed, elegant. Lord Ashford requests the honor of your presence at a ball celebrating the engagement of his daughter, Lady Caroline Ashford, to Viscount Edmund Hartley. The date was set for the following Saturday. Alexander had crumpled the card slowly in his fist, feeling the expensive paper crush and tear, and thrown it into the fireplace. Then he had poured himself a brandy at 11 in the morning and tried very hard not to think about what it meant. Caroline was engaged to Hartley, to a decent, suitable, unremarkable man who would give her a comfortable life and probably never understand her at all. It was for the best. It was what Ashford wanted. It was the inevitable conclusion to 10 years of careful distance. It was destroying him. His mother came to see him that afternoon. She arrived unannounced, which was unlike her. The Dowager Duchess of Greymoor was a woman of rigid propriety, and unexpected visits violated several of her personal principles. But she swept into his study without knocking, took one look at him sitting at his desk with an empty glass and a half-empty decanter, and sighed. "Oh, Alexander." He did not look up. "Mother, you received the invitation." "Yes." "You're not going?" "No." She settled into the chair across from his desk, arranging her skirts with precise movements. Even in her widowhood, even in private, she maintained perfect composure. It was what her generation did. They suffered quietly, elegantly, never allowing the world to see them break. "May I ask why?" she said. "I have business in London." "You have no such thing." He finally looked at her. "What would you have me do, Mother? Attend a ball celebrating the woman I—" He stopped, the words catching in his throat. "The woman you love," she finished quietly. He said nothing. "How long have you known?" he asked instead. "Since you were 23 years. Old, came home from that dreadful meeting with Lord Ashford, looking like someone had cut out your heart." She folded her hands in her lap. "You've never been as inscrutable as you think, my dear. Not to me." Alexander stood, walking to the window, needing distance, needing air. "It doesn't matter what I feel," he said. "I gave my word. To a man who had no right to ask for it. He had every right. Father owed him. Your father's debts were not yours to pay with your happiness. They were exactly mine to pay. I inherited the title. I inherited the responsibilities, including the consequences of his failures." His mother was quiet for a long moment. Then, "And what about Caroline's choice? Did anyone ask her what she wanted? She wants security, a good marriage, a respectable life. You don't know that. I know she deserves better than to be tied to a family like ours. She deserves to choose for herself." Alexander's hands clenched on the windowsill. Outside, Greymoors. Grounds stretched into the distance. Recovered now, restored to something approaching their former glory, through 10 years of careful management and sacrifice. The debts were paid. The estate was solvent. The family name had been salvaged, and it had cost him everything. "The choice has been made," he said finally. "By all of us, there's no changing it now." His mother stood, crossing to stand beside him. "There is always a choice, Alexander. Right up until the moment she says her vows. After that," she trailed off, her expression sad. "After that you will have to live with your silence for the rest of your life. And I wonder if your precious honor will be comfort enough when you're alone in this house, growing old with nothing but regrets for company." He had no answer to that. She kissed his cheek, a rare gesture of affection, and left him standing at the window, alone, as always. He lasted until Friday evening. That was when the resolve broke. He had been sitting in his study, trying to work, trying to focus on correspondence and ledgers and anything that would keep his mind occupied. But the words blurred. The numbers made no sense. His thoughts kept drifting north, toward Ashford Manor, toward the ball that would take place tomorrow night, toward Caroline. At 9:30 he made his decision. He would go. Not to stop the engagement. He had no right, no grounds, no ability to do that without breaking his word and destroying everything he had built. But to see her, one last time, to say goodbye properly, even if she would not know that was what it was. To have one memory that was not tainted by distance and duty and all the things he could not say. It was selfish. It was foolish. It was all he had left. He called for his valet, ordered his best evening clothes prepared, and sent a message ahead to Ashford that he had been able to rearrange his schedule and would be attending after all. Then he sat alone in the darkness and wondered if he was making the greatest mistake of his life, or if he had made that mistake 10 years ago, and this was simply the final consequence. Hartley House blazed with light. Alexander arrived fashionably late, not deliberately, but because he had ridden slowly, putting off the moment when he would have to walk through those doors and face what waited inside. The house itself was impressive, a newer construction than Greymore or Ashford Manor, built in the modern style with clean lines and large windows. Money, clearly, and lots of it. The kind of money that came from smart investments and well-managed estates, rather than centuries of accumulated wealth. The kind of money that would keep Caroline comfortable, safe. Everything Alexander had told himself he wanted for her. He dismounted, handed his horse to a waiting groom, and walked up the broad steps. Inside, the entrance hall was filled with guests, ladies in silk and jewels, gentlemen in black evening dress, everyone laughing and talking and celebrating. The air smelled of perfume and champagne and hothouse flowers. Music drifted from the ballroom, a waltz played by what sounded like a full orchestra. Expensive, elegant, everything an engagement ball should be. Alexander moved through the crowd, acknowledging greetings, nodding to acquaintances, feeling as though he were moving through water. Everything seemed slightly distant, slightly unreal, as if he were watching himself from outside his own body. And then he saw her. Caroline stood near the ballroom entrance, her hand resting lightly on Hartley's arm. She wore white, not the virginal white of a debutante, but a richer, more sophisticated shade, like cream or ivory. The dress was cut low, in the latest fashion, with delicate lace and seed pearls that caught the candlelight. Her hair was swept up, held in place with diamond pins that he recognized. Her mother's probably brought out for this special occasion. She looked radiant. She looked happy. She looked like everything was exactly as it should be, until she saw him. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and for just a moment, one breath, one heartbeat, the smile slipped. Her face went very still. Her fingers tightened on Hartley's sleeve. Then she recovered, the smile returning, perfect and meaningless. She said something to Hartley, who nodded and stepped away to greet another guest. And Caroline walked toward Alexander. They met in the doorway between the entrance hall and the ballroom, a threshold suspended between the public performance and whatever truth might exist in the spaces in between. "Your Grace," she said, her voice steady. "I didn't expect you. Lady Caroline, Viscount Hartley." Alexander bowed to them both. "My congratulations on your engagement." "Thank you," Hartley said, warmly rejoining them. "We're delighted you could attend. Caroline mentioned you were unable to make it. Some business in London?" "It was postponed." "Fortunate for us, then. I hope you'll do us the honor of staying for the dancing." Of course. The conversation was perfectly polite, perfectly normal, and it was killing him. Hartley excused himself again, someone calling for him, some host duty that required his attention, leaving Alexander alone with Caroline. "You shouldn't have come," she said quietly, not looking at him. "I know. Why did you?" He had no good answer to that. "Because I'm weak. Because I couldn't stay away. Because I needed to see you one more time before you became someone else's. I wanted to congratulate you properly," he said instead. How thoughtful. The sarcasm in her tone was so faint he might have imagined it. "Caroline, don't." She finally looked at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Please, not here. Not tonight. I just wanted to say, I know what you want to say. You want to tell me you're happy for me, that Hartley is a good man, that I'm making the right choice, that everything is as it should be." Her voice remained low, controlled, but he could hear the emotion underneath. "And maybe you even believe it, but I can't hear it from you, not tonight." Alexander felt something crack in his chest. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it, for so much more than this moment. "I know." She blinked rapidly, fighting the tears. "I know you are." Hartley returned then, smiling, oblivious, full of the particular confidence of a man whose life was going exactly according to plan. "Shall we begin the dancing?" he said to Caroline. "I believe they're waiting for us." Caroline nodded, placing her hand on his arm, and they walked into the ballroom together. Alexander stood in the doorway and watched them take their places at the center of the floor. The music began, a waltz, of course, the traditional first dance for an engaged couple, and he watched Hartley take Caroline in his arms, watched them move together, perfectly proper, exactly the right distance apart, watched her smile up at her fiancé, that same empty, perfect smile. And he knew, with a certainty that felt like drowning, that he had lost her. Not to Hartley, to his own silence, to his own choice, to the promise he had made 10 years ago and kept with such ruthless discipline that it had destroyed everything he cared about. He stayed for exactly 1 hour, long enough that leaving would not seem like flight, long enough to fulfill the basic requirements of courtesy, not long enough to watch Caroline dance with anyone else, not long enough to hear the toasts, the tea, speeches, the public declarations of love and commitment that would make this engagement real in a way that mere announcement could not. He found Ashford near the refreshment table, congratulated him again with all the appropriate phrases, and made his excuses. "Leaving so soon?" Ashford frowned. "The evening's barely begun. I'm afraid I must. Early departure for London tomorrow." "Ah, yes, of course. Well, I'm glad you could come at all. It means a great deal. To Caroline, you know. You've always been special to her." The words were like knives. "She's a remarkable woman," Alexander said carefully. "Hartley is very fortunate." "Indeed he is, though I like to think she's fortunate as well. Good family, good prospects. He'll take care of her." "I could have taken care of her, but Alexander did not say it, would never say it." "I'm certain he will," he said instead. He shook Ashford's hand, accepted the other man's thanks for coming, and walked toward the door. He had almost made it, almost escaped, and then Caroline was there, appearing from nowhere, her white dress almost luminous in the candlelight. "You're leaving?" Not a question. "Yes." "Of course you are." She looked at him, really looked at him, with an intensity that made him feel stripped bare. "Will I see you again? After the wedding?" "If you wish." "Do I have a choice?" He did not understand the question. "Of course you do." She laughed, soft and bitter. "I have no choices, Alexander. I never have. Not about anything that matters. Caroline, you could stop this." The words came out in a rush, desperate, breaking through all her careful control. "Right now, tonight, you could tell my father the truth, whatever truth it is that's kept you away all these years. You could tell Hartley I don't love him. You could tell me—" She stopped, swallowed. Tears were streaming down her face now, unchecked. "You could tell me that you care, that I'm not imagining this, that there's a reason, any reason for all of it." Alexander's hands clenched at his sides. Every instinct he possessed screamed at him to reach for her, to pull her into his arms, to tell her everything, to damn his promise and Ashford's threats and the careful life he had built on silence and sacrifice. But he did not, because 10 years ago he had given his word, and breaking it now would destroy not just himself, but her as well. The scandal would be devastating. A broken engagement, an accusation of seduction, her reputation shredded, her future ruined, all because he could not keep his feelings to himself. "I can't," he whispered. Caroline's face crumpled. Then, with visible effort, she straightened her shoulders, wiped her eyes, and composed herself. When she spoke again, her voice was steady. "Then I hope you're satisfied with your honor, Your Grace. I hope it keeps you warm at night. I hope it's enough." She turned and walked back into the ballroom, back to Hartley, back to the life she had not chosen, but would live anyway. Alexander stood frozen for a moment longer. Then he walked out into the night, climbed onto his horse, and rode away. He did not look back. This story is a work of fiction, created for emotional reflection and storytelling. Any resemblance to real persons or events is purely coincidental. When does silence become complicity? When does honor become cowardice? When does protection become control? Alexander told himself he was doing the right thing, that his silence was a gift, that letting Caroline go was the greatest act of love he could offer. But what if he was wrong? What if she didn't need protection? What if she needed truth? And what if, by the time he realized it, it was too late? The wedding took place on a grey morning in late November. Alexander did not attend. This time no one questioned his absence. A duke had many responsibilities, many demands on his time. Missing a wedding, even one as significant as this, was regrettable but understandable. Lord Ashford sent a brief note afterward. The ceremony was beautiful. Caroline looked radiant. I wish you could have been there. Alexander burned the note without responding. He spent the day in his study as he had spent most days since the engagement ball. Working, always working. There were estate matters to attend to, correspondence to answer, investments to review. The business of being a duke was endless, consuming, a convenient excuse to fill every hour so there was no time left for thinking. For feeling. His mother had stopped visiting. Not out of anger, she was too refined for such obvious displays, but out of a kind of resigned sadness. She had said what she needed to say. Alexander had made his choice. There was nothing left but to watch him live with the consequences. Sometimes, late at night, he would stand at the window of his study and look north, toward Ashford Manor, toward the estate where Caroline had lived her entire life, where she no longer lived. She was Viscountess Hartley, now living in Derbyshire. 8,000 a year. A beautiful property, he'd been told, a good life, everything she deserved. He told himself this repeatedly, told himself it was enough, that she would be happy, that Hartley would be kind to her, would cherish her, would give her children and security and all the things Alexander could not. And sometimes, for brief moments, he almost believed it. Winter came early that year. By mid-December, snow had blanketed Greymoor's grounds, transforming the estate into something from a painting, beautiful, pristine, cold. Alexander walked the grounds alone most mornings, his breath misting in the frozen air, his boots crunching through the snow. The exercise helped, the cold helped. The sheer physical discomfort of it helped distract from everything else. It was on one of these walks that he found the letter. Not in the snow, of course. It was waiting for him when he returned to the house, delivered while he was out. A single envelope, cream-colored, addressed in a hand he recognized immediately. Caroline's. He stared at it for a long moment, his gloved hands trembling slightly. Then he carried it to his study, built up the fire until the room was almost uncomfortably warm, poured himself a brandy he would not drink, and opened it. Dear Alexander, I hope you will forgive the informality of this letter and the presumption of writing to you at all. I am aware that our correspondence ended years ago, that we have maintained only the most distant of acquaintanceships, that this violation of propriety may seem strange, but I find myself in need of someone to speak to, and you are the only person who might understand. I have been married for 3 weeks now. The wedding was everything one could wish. Beautiful weather despite the season, a lovely ceremony, generous well-wishers. Edmund is kind. His family is welcoming. The house is comfortable. I have everything a woman could reasonably want, and yet I find myself writing to you at midnight, alone in a room that is not mine, in a house that does not feel like home, wondering what mistake I have made. I do not love him. I thought I could. I thought that affection might grow, that companionship might be enough, that duty and respect could substitute for something deeper. But 3 weeks of marriage have taught me that some things cannot be manufactured, no matter how much one might wish it. Edmund deserves better. He deserves a wife who looks at him the way he looks at me, with genuine feeling, not polite regard. Who thinks of him first thing upon waking, not as an afterthought. Who wants to build a life with him, not simply endure one. But I cannot give him that, because my heart is elsewhere, has always been elsewhere. You know this, I think. Perhaps you have always known it, just as I have always known why you withdrew from me 10 years ago, why you maintained that careful distance, why you would not, could not, speak. My father made you promise, didn't he? I do not know the details. He has never told me, and you certainly never would. But I am not foolish. I have watched you both for a decade, seen the way father relaxed when you began avoiding me, the way you flinched when he mentioned my suitors, the way you looked at me when you thought I did not notice. You kept your word, even when it destroyed us both. I should be angry. Perhaps I am. But mostly I am just tired. Tired of pretending. tired of living a life chosen by other people, tired of wondering what might have been if even one person had asked me what I wanted. I am writing to you because I need you to know something. I do not blame you. I understand why you made the choice you did. I understand that you believed you were protecting me, honoring your commitment to my father, doing what was right. And perhaps you were. Perhaps this is exactly the life I was meant to have. Comfortable, respectable, empty. But I want you to know that I would have chosen differently. If anyone had asked, if anyone had given me the choice, I would have chosen you. Despite the debts, despite the scandal, despite everything, I would have chosen you. I needed to tell you that, to say it once, even if only on paper, even if I burn this letter before I send it. I loved you, I love you still, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to forget it. Please do not respond to this letter. Please do not try to see me. It would only make things harder than they already are. Just know that somewhere in Derbyshire, in a house that is not quite home, there is a woman who thinks of you every day and wishes, futilely, foolishly, that things had been different. Yours, Caroline Alexander, read the letter 3 times. Then he sat very still, the pages trembling in his hands, and felt something inside him shatter. She had known. All this time she had known about the promise, and she had married Hartley anyway, not because she wanted to, but because no one had given her another option. Because Alexander had been so determined to keep his word, so convinced he was doing the right thing, that he had never once asked her what she wanted, had never given her a choice. He stood abruptly, walked to the fireplace, and held the letter over the flames. It would be so easy to burn it, to pretend he had never read it, to continue the careful life he had built on silence and sacrifice, but his hands would not release it, because these pages, these words, was the only truth either of them had spoken in 10 years, and he could not destroy it, even if keeping it was torture. He folded the letter carefully, placed it in the locked drawer of his desk, where he kept his most important papers, and sat down to write a response he would never send. Dear Caroline, you asked me not to respond. I am honoring that request. This letter will never reach you. But I find I cannot leave your words unanswered, even if the answer exists only for myself. You are right about everything. Your father did ask me to promise. The day after my own father's funeral, he came to me and demanded my word that I would never pursue you. The price of that promise was forgiveness of a debt so large it would have ruined what remained of my family's name. I agreed because I believed I had no choice, because I was 23 years old and terrified and convinced that honor mattered more than anything else, because I thought I was protecting you. But you are right. I never asked you. I never gave you a choice. I decided what was best for you and enforced it through silence, all while telling myself it was noble. It was not noble. It was cowardice. I was afraid of scandal, afraid of ruin, afraid of being the kind of man my father was, afraid that if I claimed you, I would destroy everything you deserved to have. So I let you go, and I told myself it was an act of love. Perhaps it was, or perhaps it was simply the easiest choice, easier than fighting your father, easier than risking everything, easier than trusting that you might choose me despite all the reasons you should not. You say you would have chosen me. I believe you. And that knowledge is both the greatest gift and the greatest torment I could imagine, because it means I was wrong about everything. I sacrificed our happiness for an honor that was never truly mine to defend. I kept a promise that should never have been asked. I protected you from a choice you deserved to make, and now it is too late. You are married. You belong to someone else, and I must live with the knowledge that I could have prevented it, that one word from me, one moment of courage, might have changed everything. But I said nothing, and silence, I am learning, is the cruelest choice of all. You asked me not to try to see you. I will honor that request. I will not write again, will not visit, will not insert myself into your life in any way. But know this, I loved you when we were children, playing beneath the oak tree. I loved you when I made that damned promise and every day afterward. I love you now, reading your letter by firelight, knowing I can never tell you. I will love you until I die, and perhaps that is my punishment, to spend the rest of my life knowing that I had something precious and threw it away in the name of honor that was really just fear. Be happy, Caroline. Or if you cannot be happy, be content. Or if you cannot be content, be at peace. You deserve all of that and more. Even if I cannot give it to you. Forever yours, Alexander. He sealed the letter, wrote her name on the envelope, and placed it in the drawer beside hers. 2 letters, 2 confessions, destined never to be read by the people they were meant for. The winter deepened. Snow fell almost daily, blanketing Greymore in white, isolating the estate from the outside world. Alexander worked. He managed the estate with ruthless efficiency, implementing improvements, increasing productivity, ensuring that the next generation would inherit something more than debt and disgrace. He attended Parliament when required, voted on bills, made speeches no one listened to. He maintained every responsibility his position demanded, and he died inside, a little more each day. Not dramatically, not obviously, just the slow erosion of everything that had once made him feel alive. His mother noticed, of course. She came to visit in January, bringing news from London, gossip about acquaintances, the kind of conversation meant to fill silence without meaning anything. But when she was leaving, she paused at the door of his study and said very quietly, "You're going to waste your entire life on this, aren't you?" Alexander looked up from his papers. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." She studied him with sad eyes. "You're going to grow old in this house, alone, honorable, perfectly miserable, and you'll tell yourself it's noble. What would you have me do?" "I would have you live." She pulled on her gloves, preparing to leave. "But I suspect it's too late for that now." She was right. It was too late. Caroline was married. The promise was kept. The consequences were permanent. All that remained was to endure them. Spring came eventually, as it always does. The snow melted. Green returned to Greymoor's grounds. Life renewed itself with indifferent persistence. Alexander stood at the window of his study one morning in late March and watched the world wake up. And he thought about Caroline, wondered if she was happy, wondered if Hartley was kind to her, wondered if she thought of him, wondered if she had forgotten. He would never know, and perhaps that was appropriate. Perhaps this was the price of honor, not knowing, living with uncertainty, accepting that some questions would never be answered. He returned to his desk, to his work, to the endless duties that filled his days, and he told himself it was enough, that he had done the right thing, that sometimes love meant letting go. That sacrifice was noble. That honor mattered. He told himself all of these things, and he tried, God, he tried to believe them. What is honor worth? Is it worth more than happiness? More than truth? More than love? Alexander Cain believed it was. He had built his entire life on that belief, sacrificed everything to maintain it. And now, sitting alone in a house too large for one man, surrounded by the success his sacrifice had bought, he wondered, what if he had been wrong? What if honor, without love, was just another word for emptiness? What if keeping his word had been the greatest betrayal of all? He would never know, because some choices, once made, cannot be unmade. Some words, once left unspoken, cannot be retrieved. Some chances, once lost, are lost forever. And all the honor in the world cannot change that. 5 years passed. They were not eventful years, at least not in ways that would seem significant to an outside observer. Alexander continued to manage his estate. He attended Parliament. He fulfilled his social obligations with perfect propriety. He became known as a reliable, if somewhat reserved, member of his class, a duke who took his responsibilities seriously, who managed his lands well, who could be counted upon for thoughtful contributions to political debates. He was respected, admired even, and utterly alone. His mother passed away in the winter of his 38th year, peacefully, in her sleep, exactly as she would have wanted. She left behind a well-ordered household, meticulously maintained accounts, and a letter addressed to Alexander that he found in her personal papers. "My dearest son, if you are reading this, I am gone. Please do not mourn overmuch. I have lived a full life and am ready for whatever comes next. I have only one regret, that I could not help you understand the difference between honor and happiness before it was too late. You are so much like your father in some ways. Stubborn, proud, committed to doing what you believe is right no matter the cost. But you are also unlike him in the way that matters most. You have a good heart. Use it, Alexander. It is not too late to choose differently. It is never too late to choose love. Your loving mother. He had read the letter once, folded it carefully, and placed it in the drawer with the 2 other letters that lived there. Caroline's confession and his unsent response. 3 pieces of paper, 3 different expressions of the same truth, a truth he would never act upon because it was too late. Caroline had been married for 5 years. Perhaps she had children by now. Perhaps she had found happiness with Hartley. Perhaps she had forgotten him entirely. And even if she hadn't, even if she still thought of him sometimes, still wondered what might have been, what good would it do to disturb that peace? His mother was wrong. It was too late. Some chances, once lost, stayed lost. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in late autumn. Not from Caroline. He would have recognized her handwriting immediately. This was from a solicitor in London, a firm he did not know regarding a matter they would not specify in writing. Alexander almost ignored it. He received dozens of letters from solicitors, most of them regarding business matters that his own legal team could handle. But something about the formal phrasing, the deliberate vagueness, made him pause. He wrote back requesting clarification. The response came 3 days later. Your Grace, the matter concerns Lady Caroline Hartley and is of a sensitive personal nature. We respectfully request a meeting at your earliest convenience to discuss the details in person. Alexander's heart stopped. Caroline. Something had happened to Caroline. He was on a horse to London within the hour. The solicitor's office was located in a respectable part of the city, tucked between a bookseller and a tailor's shop. Alexander arrived disheveled from travel, having ridden through the night and most of the following day, and was immediately shown into a private consultation room. The solicitor, a Mr. Pemberton, middle-aged and professional, rose to greet him. Your Grace, thank you for coming so quickly. Your letter mentioned Lady Hartley. Alexander's voice was rougher than he intended. Is she well? She is physically well, yes, please sit. Alexander sat, his hands gripping the arms of the chair to keep them from trembling. Pemberton settled behind his desk, arranged some papers, and looked at Alexander with an expression of careful neutrality. I am handling a rather delicate matter for Lady Hartley, he began. She has requested that I make certain inquiries on her behalf, and your name has come up in that context. What kind of inquiries? She wishes to know the details of an agreement made approximately 15 years ago between yourself and her father, Lord Ashford. The world tilted slightly. I don't understand. Lord Ashford passed away 3 months ago, Pemberton said, gently. In the process of settling his affairs, Lady Hartley discovered certain inconsistencies in his accounts, debts that had been forgiven, references to agreements that were never properly documented. Alexander's throat had gone completely dry. She began asking questions, Pemberton continued, and eventually she came to me. She believes, and please correct me if I am wrong, that her father extracted some kind of promise from you, something that affected your relationship with her. Why would she think that? Because she knows you, Your Grace. Pemberton's expression softened slightly, and she knows that the man you are would not have withdrawn from her without reason. Alexander sat in silence, his mind racing. Ashford was dead. The promise had been made to Ashford. Did that mean... What exactly is Lady Hartley asking? He said carefully. She wants to know the truth, all of it. What her father asked of you, why you agreed, what price you paid for your silence. And if I tell her? That is entirely your decision, Your Grace. I am simply facilitating the communication at her request. Pemberton paused. Though I should mention, Lady Hartley indicated that she would understand if you chose not to respond, that she has no wish to cause you pain or complication. She simply wants to know. Alexander closed his eyes. After 15 years, after marriage and silence and carefully maintained distance, she still wanted to know. Does Lord Hartley know she's making these inquiries, he asked. Something flickered across Pemberton's face. Lord Hartley is no longer a relevant concern. What does that mean? Lady Hartley and Lord Hartley have separated. Amicably, I'm told. He has returned to Derbyshire. She is currently residing in London. The room spun, separated. Caroline had left her husband. When? Alexander managed. Approximately 2 months ago. shortly after her father's death. Alexander stood abruptly, needing to move, to think, to process what he was hearing. "Where is she staying?" "I'm not at liberty to divulge that information without her permission, Your Grace." "Then get her permission." Pemberton studied him for a long moment. "May I ask your intentions?" "I'm going to tell her the truth. All of it. Every damned word I should have said 15 years ago." Alexander's voice shook with something between anger and hope. "And then I'm going to ask her if I'm too late." Pemberton smiled, the first genuine expression he had shown. "I will send word to Lady Hartley immediately. I suspect you will have her address by this evening." The address, when it came, was for a modest townhouse in Bloomsbury. Not a fashionable area, not where a viscountess would typically reside, but respectable, quiet, the kind of place someone might choose if they wanted privacy more than prestige. Alexander stood outside the door for a full minute before knocking. His heart hammered in his chest. His hands shook. For the first time in 15 years, he was about to speak the truth, and he had no idea what would happen next. He knocked. Footsteps approached. Light, quick, feminine. The door opened, and there she was. Caroline. Older now, yes. She would be 31, he calculated automatically. There were faint lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, a new gravity to her expression, but still beautiful. Still the girl who had climbed trees and demanded poetry and looked at him as if he held all the answers. They stared at each other. "Alexander," she said softly. Just his name, not Your Grace. Not any of the formal distance they had maintained for so long. Just Alexander. "May I come in?" he asked. She stepped aside wordlessly. The townhouse was small but comfortable. A sitting room, a study, probably 1 or 2 bedrooms upstairs. Books everywhere. Clearly she had been living here for some time, not just passing through. This was her home, chosen by her, for her, not assigned by a husband or a father, or anyone else. They stood in the sitting room, neither quite certain how to begin. Finally, Caroline spoke. "Mr. Pemberton said you wanted to tell me the truth." "Yes." "All of it?" "Every word." She nodded, settling into a chair. "Then please. I've waited 15 years. I can wait a few more minutes." Alexander remained standing, not out of propriety, but because he could not sit still, could not contain the energy that had been building in him since receiving that first letter from Pemberton. And he told her everything. About his father's debts, the gambling, the failed investments, the borrowed money that had never been repaid. About the meeting with Lord Ashford the day after the funeral. About the promise that had been extracted, never pursue her, never court her, never allow her to believe there could be anything between them. About the price of that promise, £15,000 of debt forgiven, the family name protected, scandal avoided. About the choice he had made, to keep his word, to maintain his honor, to do what he believed was right. And about the cost, the 10 years of watching her from a distance, the engagement to Hartley, the ball where he had stood silent while she looked at him with tears in her eyes and begged him to say something. The letter she had written, the response he had never sent. The 5 years since, living with the knowledge that he could have prevented it all with one word. He told her everything, and when he was finished, he felt both lighter and heavier than he had in 15 years. Caroline sat very still throughout, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. When he finally fell silent, she spoke. "My father told me," she said quietly, "on his deathbed, that he had done something he regretted, that he had interfered in my life in a way he shouldn't have, that he had been trying to protect me but had only succeeded in hurting me." She looked up at Alexander. "I didn't understand what he meant until I found the records of the debt, until I started putting pieces together. Caroline, do you know what the worst part is?" she continued, her voice still calm, but with an edge to it now. "Not that he made you promise, not even that you kept it. The worst part is that no one, not my father, not you, not anyone, ever asked me what I wanted. I know. You decided what was best for me. You decided I deserved better than a duke with debts. You decided I should marry Hartley. You decided my entire future, without ever asking me if that was what I wanted. You're right. I know I'm right." Her composure cracked, emotion flooding through. "I spent 5 years married to a good man I didn't love. trying to convince myself that duty was enough, that companionship could substitute for passion. 5 years pretending to be happy while thinking of you every single day. Alexander's chest ached. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry isn't enough. I know that too." They looked at each other. Across the small room, all the distance and silence and lost years between them. Then Caroline spoke again, softer now. "Why did you come here, Alexander?" "Because I wanted to tell you the truth. The truth you could have told me 15 years ago." "Yes. Why now?" He took a breath. "Because I'm tired of being honorable. Because I've spent 15 years doing what I thought was right, and all it's gotten me is a life that feels like slow death. Because my mother was right. It's never too late to choose differently." He crossed the room, dropped to one knee in front of her chair, looked up into those storm-grey eyes he had loved his entire adult life. "Because I love you. Because I have always loved you. Because I cannot spend one more day pretending I don't." Tears spilled down Caroline's cheeks. "You're 15 years too late," she whispered. "I know. I might not forgive you. I wouldn't blame you. I might spend the rest of my life being angry at you for what we lost. I understand." She looked at him, really looked at him, searching his face for something. "Are you asking me to give you another chance?" "I'm asking," Alexander said carefully, "if there's any possibility that it's not too late, that we could start again. Not where we left off, we can't go back, but somewhere new, somewhere honest." Caroline was silent for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched his face, just her fingertips against his cheek, the first physical contact they had had in years. "I don't know," she said. "I don't know if I can trust you again. I don't know if we can build something real after so much silence. I understand, but I want to try." The words came out in a rush. "God help me. After everything, I still want to try." Alexander closed his eyes, feeling something like hope unfurl in his chest for the first time in years. "Then we'll try," he said. Slowly, honestly. "No more secrets, no more silence. No more choosing for me what you think is best. Never. Again, I swear it." Caroline smiled, a real smile, tentative but genuine. "Then perhaps," she said softly, "it's not too late after all." They did not marry immediately. There were practicalities to consider. Caroline's separation needed to be formalized, time needed to pass to avoid scandal, society needed to be managed. But more than that, they needed time. Time to learn each other again, time to build trust, time to discover if the love that had survived 15 years of silence could survive. Honesty as well. Alexander courted her properly this time, called on her at her townhouse, took her to museums, theaters, parks, talked with her, really talked, about everything they had never been able to say. And slowly, carefully, they built something new. Not the innocent friendship of their childhood, not the desperate longing of their youth, but something mature, complex, real. A year later, when the scandal of Caroline's separation had faded enough to be overlooked, when they were both certain this was what they wanted, Alexander asked her to marry him, not with pretty words or grand gestures, just honestly. "I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to wake up beside you every morning and go to sleep beside you every night. I want to build a life together, messy and real and ours. Will you marry me?" Caroline looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Yes." The wedding was small, just close friends, immediate family. No grand ball, no elaborate ceremony. They were married in the chapel at Graymore, beneath the same arched ceiling where Alexander's parents had been married, where he had stood at his father's funeral and made the promise that had cost him 15 years. But this time, the promise was different. This time he vowed to love and cherish Caroline, to be honest with her, to never make choices for her, to build a life together based on truth, not silence. And when he kissed her, finally, after all these years, it felt like coming home. They did not have a perfect marriage. There were moments when the old hurts resurfaced, when Caroline remembered the years she had lost, when Alexander struggled with guilt for the pain he had caused. They fought sometimes, they disagreed, they had to learn how to communicate after so long maintaining distance, but they were honest. They chose each other. Every day, they chose each other. And slowly, they built something real. Caroline transformed Graymore, not into something fashionable or grand, but into a home. She filled it with books and music and laughter. She invited friends, hosted dinners, made the cold stone house warm for the first time in Alexander's memory. They traveled together, to Italy, to Greece, to all the places they had read about as children. They worked together on the estate, Caroline bringing fresh perspectives to old problems. And they loved each other. Not perfectly, not without scars, but deeply, honestly, truly. 10 years after their wedding, Alexander found Caroline in the garden beneath the oak tree where they had played as children. She was reading. Byron, he saw as he approached. The same poems he had read to her decades ago. She looked up and smiled. "Hello, husband." "Hello, wife." He sat beside her, his back against the rough bark, just as he had done when they were young. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "The years we lost?" Caroline set down her book, considering the question seriously. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I wish we had had more time together. I wish our children could have been younger." They had two, a daughter of 8 and a son of 6, both currently terrorizing their governess indoors. "I wish I had not wasted 5 years in a marriage that was wrong for everyone involved." She paused, took his hand. "But I don't regret where we ended up, because those lost years taught us both something important, that silence is a choice, that honor without truth is worthless, that love requires courage. And you think we have that now? Courage?" "I think," Caroline said, squeezing his hand, "that we're learning." Alexander smiled, pulled her closer, breathed in the familiar scent of lavender that still clung to her hair. "I love you," he said. Simple words, the same words he had said 1,000 times before, but they still meant everything. "I know," Caroline replied, "and I love you too." They sat together beneath the oak tree as the sun set over Greymoor's grounds, watching the sky turn gold and orange and purple. And for the first time in his life, Alexander felt at peace, not because everything was perfect, not because the past had been erased, but because he had finally learned what his mother had tried to teach him, that it is never too late to choose love, that truth is worth the risk, that sometimes the greatest act of courage is admitting you were wrong, and that silence, no matter how noble the intention, is never the answer. This story is a work of fiction, created for emotional reflection and storytelling. Any resemblance to real persons or events is purely coincidental. What would you do if given a second chance? Would you make the same choices, or would you choose differently? Alexander Cain spent 15 years living with honor and regret. In the end, he learned that honor without love is just another form of death, that duty without truth is a prison, that sometimes the rules we think bind us are really just excuses for our fear. He learned it late, too late to avoid pain, but not too late to build something real. And perhaps that is the lesson. It is never too late, not to love, not to tell the truth, not to choose courage over comfort, not to fight for what matters, not to begin again. The question is, will you?